Story 1. It happened in the winter of 2016, and I've never been able to explain it. I've told it maybe 4 times in my life because every time I do, people either don't believe me or tell me I must have been tired. Maybe I was, but that doesn't explain the things I saw. I'd been in Vermont for work, just a short seasonal job, helping out with some maintenance at a ski lodge. It wasn't glamorous, but it covered rent and let me spend most of my off hours snowboarding. That night I was driving back to my parents' place in New Hampshire. It was mid-December, a few days before Christmas, and the snow had been coming down for hours. If you've never driven rural New England roads in winter, you can't really understand how isolating it feels. There's just nothing. No streetlights, no houses for miles. Just narrow strips of road cut between towering black trees. The snow piles along the shoulders like frozen walls, and the sky goes a kind of deep navy blue that makes you feel like you're at the bottom of an ocean. My phone had no signal. My old Subaru's heater clicked faintly, the dashboard glowed soft orange, and the wipers dragged slowly back and forth. I had another hour and a half to go. It was sometime around 11:30 p.m. when I saw her. A lone figure walking on the side of the road. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it, the way snow swirls and headlights can trick your eyes. But then the shape solidified. She was wearing a long dark coat, buttoned all the way up, in a pale knitted scarf that trailed down almost to her knees. Her hair was dark, but there was something strange about it. It looked wet and heavy, hanging in clumps. She wasn't holding her arm out to flag me down. She was just walking, slowly. There was no car anywhere, no tire tracks except mine. Just her. Now here's the thing. I wasn't about to stop for a stranger in the middle of nowhere. It was freezing, yes, but it's the dead of night, and I've heard too many bad hitchhiker stories. But as I passed her, I made the mistake of glancing in the rearview mirror. She had stopped walking and was staring directly at my car. I don't mean facing the road. I mean her head was tilted slightly, her chin down, and her eyes locked on me, like she'd been waiting for me specifically. I pressed the gas a little harder. The Subaru wasn't fast on the best of days, but I wanted distance. The road curved left. I drove another half mile, and then she was in front of me, standing right at the edge of my headlights, in the same coat and scarf, the same wet hair clinging to her cheeks. There was no way, no side roads, no driveways, no paths. I hadn't seen her pass me, and the snow was untouched except for my tire tracks. I slowed, hard hammering, and swerved wide to pass her. She didn't move, didn't flinch. Her head turned slowly as I passed, following my car. I kept my eyes forward, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. I told myself to keep driving, just keep going. The road narrowed ahead, winding between dense stands of pines. My headlights caught a flicker of movement up ahead, and for the third time, there she was. This time she was closer to the center of the road. And her face, her skin looked pale to the point of gray, her lips almost blue. But her eyes were the worst part. They were wide and glassy, reflecting the light like an animal's. I didn't stop. I swerved again, but as I passed, her mouth opened slowly, like she was about to speak. I didn't hear anything, but my ears popped, the way they do in an airplane, and a wave of pressure filled the car. I drove faster than I should have. The snow blurred past in long streaks. I kept expecting to see her again, and every bend in the road felt like it might reveal her shape. But I didn't. Instead, about 20 minutes later, I saw the lights of a gas station ahead. I pulled in, tires crunching on packed snow, and just sat there for a minute, breathing hard. Inside, the gas station was almost empty. The attendant was an older man with a flannel shirt and a Red Sox cap. I bought a coffee just to have an excuse to stand there and feel normal again. He asked where I was coming from, and when I told him the route, he paused. "You didn't stop for anyone, did you?" he asked. I said no. He nodded slowly. "Good, just keep it that way." I asked why. He didn't answer, just handed me my change and said, "Drive safe now." When I got back into the car, the inside of my windshield was fogged up. Not from my breath, I'd been gone too long for that. And in the fog on the passenger's side, someone had drawn a long vertical line with 3 short horizontal lines crossing it near the top. Like tally marks. There were 3 of them. That night, I didn't finish the drive to my parents' place. I checked into a cheap roadside motel and sat awake until sunrise, the coffee gone cold in my hands. I never saw her again. But every winter, when the roads are empty and the snow falls in thick, soundless sheets, I think about her, and I never, ever look in the rearview mirror for too long. Story 2. When I think back on the winter of 2004, I can still feel the cold in my bones. It was the kind of cold that creeps into old houses and never quite leaves the kind that seems to make the air heavier. That was the year I stayed alone in my late uncle's cabin for 3 weeks, supposedly to look after the place while my cousins sorted out the estate. It was in the middle of nowhere in northern Maine, a good 40-minute drive from the nearest gas station, and that was on a clear day. The nearest neighbor was about half a mile down a barely plowed road. I thought I'd enjoy the solitude. I was wrong. The cabin was a squat, weathered thing with a sharply pitched roof and a chimney that leaned a little to the right. Snow came up to my shins when I got out of the truck, and the air burned my lungs. Inside, the place smelled faintly of pine and old smoke. My uncle had been a heavy wood stove user. There was a massive cast iron one in the living room. It's belly cold now, but waiting. I did a quick walkthrough. Everything was as my cousin had described. 2 small bedrooms, a cramped bathroom, and a single main room that served as kitchen, dining, and living space. There was also an attic with a pull-down ladder, which I didn't intend to use. The first weird thing I noticed was a set of footprints on the back porch. Not mine. They were faint, snow had blown over them, but they looked like they came from bare feet. I told myself they were old, that maybe my uncle had stepped out there for firewood without boots. But the idea of bare feet in this weather made my stomach turn, uneven. The first 2 nights were uneventful. I'd light the wood stove, cook something simple, and read until the fire died low. On the 3rd night, I woke around 2:30 a.m. to a faint tapping. At first, I thought it was a branch against the siding, but the sound was too regular. 3 slow taps, a pause, then 3 more. It was coming from the kitchen window. I didn't get up. I told myself it was ice shifting on the eaves, pulled the blankets tighter, and forced my eyes shut. When I stepped outside that morning to bring in more firewood, I saw them again. Footprints. This time they were clearer. Definitely bare feet. The toes were long and splayed, and the stride was short, as if whoever made them was shuffling. They led from the tree line directly to the back porch, stopped at the steps, and then turned back into the woods. The air felt colder than it had all week. By the 6th day, I'd started hearing creaks above me at night. Houses settle, especially in the cold, but these were rhythmic. 2 steps. Pause. 2 steps. I finally grabbed a flashlight and pulled down the attic ladder. The light beam cut across dust, cobwebs, and piles of boxes. Nothing moved. But the smell up there made me gag a sour, damp odor, like wet fabric left too long in a dark place. When I climbed back down, I realized I'd left faint footprints in the dust. Later, when I glanced up again, I saw another set beside mine, longer, wider, leading toward the corner I hadn't checked. It was snowing hard that night. I'd built up the fire and was dozing in the armchair when I heard the tapping again. This time I stood. My pulse was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stepped into the kitchen and saw the window. Frost clung to the glass except for one patch, about the size of a face, where the frost had melted. Through it, something was watching me. The features were distorted by the glass, but I could see wide, colorless eyes and a thin mouth that moved slightly, like it was whispering. I backed away without turning, grabbed my coat, and went to the front door. When I stepped out onto the porch, the night was silent. Too silent, the kind where even the wind holds its breath. Then, from behind the cabin, I heard the crunch of snow. Slow, dragging steps. The next morning, I drove the half mile to the neighbor's place. His name was Carl, A man in his late 60s with a thick beard and a stare like he was sizing you up for a coffin. I told him about the footprints, the tapping, the face. He didn't laugh. He didn't even look surprised. Instead, he said, "That stretch of woods behind your place, don't go in there after dark. And don't open your door if you hear your name." When I asked why, he said only, "Some things get lost out here and don't realize they're dead yet." 3 nights later, I woke to the sound of someone walking on the porch. It wasn't shuffling this time. It was fast, back and forth, the boards groaning under the weight. Then came the knock, 3 times. I stayed in bed. My heart was hammering. Then it said my name. Not shouted, just spoken, like a friend trying to get my attention. But it wasn't any voice I knew. It was too flat, too calm, like it had learned the shape of my name but not the meaning. On the 17th night, I'd already decided to leave in the morning. The woodpile was low, the roads were barely passable, and I couldn't stand the feeling of being watched anymore. Around midnight, I heard the attic steps again. 2. Pause. 2. Pause. Then the ladder creaked, as if weight was shifting on it. I didn't wait to see. I grabbed my keys, my coat, and my boots, and went straight to the truck. When my headlights swept across the cabin as I turned down the road, I saw movement in the attic window. A pale face pressed to the glass, watching me leave. Carl helped me load my stuff the next week. I didn't tell him that the footprints had followed the truck all the way down the drive that night, always just at the edge of the tree line. I never went back. My cousin eventually sold the cabin to some out-of-state couple who wanted a quiet getaway. I've thought about warning them, but part of me thinks if you go looking for quiet in a place like that, maybe you deserve to hear what's already there. Story 3. I had been living in Boston for the better part of 10 years when my sister called to ask if I could watch her cabin in Vermont for a week. She and her husband were going to Florida to escape the February cold, and they didn't trust leaving the place empty frozen pipes, break-ins, the usual. I'd been working remotely, and the idea of a quiet week in the mountains sounded appealing. Fresh air, no traffic, space to think. The cabin was about 3 miles outside a tiny town called Dalebridge. If you didn't already know it was there, you'd drive right past. The road wound through thick pine forest, and the snow banks on either side were taller than the hood of my Subaru. The place was small, but cozy wood stove in the living room, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen. The windows looked out over a long stretch of white field that ended in the tree line. The snow out there was pristine, except for a faint trail of animal tracks crossing it. The first night was uneventful. I made tea, fed the wood stove, and read until my eyes got heavy. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to an odd sound. It wasn't the wind. I knew the sound of wind through pines. This was a crunching, slow, deliberate, like someone walking through snow. I sat up in bed holding my breath. The sound moved past the window and around toward the back of the cabin. Then it stopped. I told myself it was a deer and forced myself to lie back down. The next morning, I decided to check. I bundled up, stepped outside, and walked around to the back of the cabin. The snow was fresh. It had fallen lightly overnight, but there they were. Footprints. Not animal tracks. Footprints. Bare feet. The toes were long, spread slightly, and the prints sank deep into the snow, as if whoever made them was heavy. They led from the tree line to the cabin, and then around the side, disappearing toward the front, where the snow had been disturbed by my own steps. I went inside and locked the doors. That afternoon, I drove into town for supplies, more firewood, bread, coffee. I mentioned the tracks to the guy at the general store, a heavy-set man named Curtis. He gave me a long look and said, "You're staying in the old Turner place?" I nodded. "Keep your curtains shut at night," he said, "and don't answer if someone knocks after dark." When I asked why, he only shrugged. "Winter brings out strange things around here." That night, the crunching returned. This time, it started farther out in the field. I could hear it moving slowly, coming closer, then stopping, then closer. closer again. I sat in the dark, my breath fogging the glass as I tried to see through the narrow slit in the curtain. The moonlight made the snow almost glow. At the edge of the field, something stood between the trees. Tall, still, watching. I couldn't make out its features, but the shape was wrong, the shoulders too high, the arms hanging low at its sides. I let the curtain fall back into place and didn't move until morning. By now the cabin didn't feel cozy anymore. It felt small, trapped. I kept catching myself checking the windows, making sure the curtains were shut. The footprints kept appearing each morning, sometimes circling the cabin, sometimes leading off into the woods. That night I woke to a soft tap, tap, tap at the window above the kitchen sink. It was after 2 a.m. I lay there, heart pounding, listening. The tapping stopped. Then came the crunch of snow moving toward the front door. And then, 3 knocks. Slow, even. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually, the sound drifted away. The next morning, I called my sister. "Have you ever had anyone come to the cabin at night?" I asked. She paused. "What do you mean?" I told her about the knocks, the footprints. There was a long silence. Finally, she said, "We've heard things before, but it's just animals. Don't open the door, even if you think you know who it is." When I pressed her, she just repeated, "Don't open the door." That night, the sound came again, not from one side this time, but from all around. Footsteps circling, moving in the snow. I stood in the center of the living room, the wood stove throwing off waves of heat, my breath still visible from the cold seeping through the walls. The crunching grew louder, then stopped. A shadow passed across the curtain. Then the knock, 3 times, followed by a voice. It said my name. Not in a shout, just conversational, like a friend at the door. But it was wrong, flat, like it had practiced saying my name without understanding what it meant. I backed away until I hit the far wall. The voice came again, softer now, coaxing. Then the footsteps moved away, into the trees. When the sun rose, I went outside. The snow around the cabin was a mess of footprints. Bare feet, overlapping, circling. Dozens of them. All leading to and from the woods. I packed my things that afternoon and drove back to Boston, not looking in the mirror once. Curtis from the store called me a week later. He'd heard I'd cut my trip short. "They don't like being ignored," he said. "Best you left when you did." I never went back, but sometimes in the dead of winter, when the streets are quiet and the snow muffles the city, I think I hear it again, that slow crunch of footsteps coming closer. And I know if I ever hear the knock, I won't open the door.